In the previous lecture, we showed how XNAT's DICOM object identifier examines patient comment tags in the DICOM. It's looking for project, subject, and session identifiers so that it can build the session XML object. It turns out that this is just one of several methods that XNAT can use to make these identifications, and that now in XNAT 1.8, site administrators have access to controls that allow them to customize this behavior in new ways. Let's zoom in on this DICOM object identification that leads into the XML session builder, because this is where the magic is happening. If we dig into the logic of this DICOM routing, we can see that there are three major classes of routing rules that are followed. There's the default set of DICOM tag parsing rules, which accommodates comment tags with multiple values and other tags with single values. And there are also custom rules that can be applied. For example, the default DICOM parsing to determine a project ID follows the following order. It looks in the patient comments field first for a composite entry of project, subject, and session. And if that doesn't return a known project ID, it's going to look in the study comments field for a similarly formatted thing. And if not there, then additional patient history. And then it's going to look in study description or accession number for just a project ID by itself. And the first of these checks that returns a valid project ID will stop the process, and the rest of the rules will be ignored. And this process repeats with similar tag checks for both the subject and session identifiers. However, all of these default rules can be superseded by a new set of rules that admins can set in the UI. We're calling these custom admin rules for now. We'll show you these with a few demonstrations. As you can see, I've created a new project called Project A with a project ID of project_A. And I've set this project to store all data in the pre-archive, and it's requiring data to stay in the pre-archive until we manually transfer it out. We want to do this so we can catch incoming sessions using our custom DICOM routing before they land in the archive and we have to worry about deleting resource files and whatnot. So I'm currently logged in as a site administrator. Let's go to the admin UI. And we'll find the Custom DICOM Routing tab. You can see we have three different panels here. One for project routing, one for subject routing, and one for session routing. For this demonstration, we're just going to focus on project routing, but the principles apply to each one. So let's create a rule. We can double-click into this field here to open a code editor. I'm going to set up a new rule that applies some custom parsing of the study description DICOM field, which is coded as 0008 1030. And let's imagine that we want to support a scan operator writing the term project followed by some kind of white space, and then the project ID, which is going to be a mix of letters and underscores. And you'll see here we're writing a regex pattern. So what we want to do is surround the term that we're looking for with parentheses, and then we will look for a word character. And that should pick up our combination of letters and underscores. We want to click Enable to enable the rule, and then Save to save our changes. Let's switch over to DICOM browser and start sending some data to our XNAT to test this out. And I've got an image session loaded, and you can see I've customized the project ID definition into the study description field. We can send this from DICOM browser to our XNAT using the DICOM SCP receiver. So we've got our remote host, our port, our AE title, and our local title, and we're going to send just this one session. And if everything works right with our DICOM routing customization, this should land in the pre-archive with the project ID of project A. So here's our pre-archive. And we can see this session is receiving, and it was attached to project_A. So our new DICOM routing rule worked perfectly. Let's explore some other scenarios. Now let's say that our project identifier is often mistyped. A scan tech might be typing a dash character instead of a hyphen on a regular basis. And this would normally cause a session to land in the unassigned pre-archive. In fact, we can replicate that behavior now. Here's our session that we just sent. You can see it's in an unassigned, or the dash failed the regex check. So this is no good. Obviously, you could be in the business of fetching this from the unassigned pre-archive, but it would be better to write a new rule that is more resilient. So I'm deleting that session so we can fix the problem. So what we can do is go back to our code editor in the DICOM routing dashboard and add a new rule beneath our first rule, where if the first rule fails to produce a project ID, the second rule can be applied. And we're going to do a couple things different here. We need a more expansive definition of what our project ID can be made of. So rather than just relying on regex's word character, we're going to specify all letters A through Z and a hyphen and an underscore just to be safe. And we're surrounding that in parentheses. And the next thing that we're going to do is kind of tricky because it takes advantage of some advanced syntax parsing that's in this DICOM rule parsing engine. First, I apply an index of 1 to tell XNAT to match the project ID to the first set of matching characters that we find. And then I can specify some text replacement rules, because what I want to do is replace the hyphen with an underscore. So I can identify the hyphen as the target character and identify the underscore as the replacement character. So when you're writing these regex patterns, it's rare that you get them right the first time, especially if you're me. So it's useful to have a regex tester just handy while you're doing these pattern definitions. So I've got the pattern that I just wrote as my regular expression, and I've got my text that I want to test against, and I can do a test match, and I've got a partial match here. I think what I'm doing is I'm not specifying multiple characters here to say, give me every character that matches this pattern before hitting a white space. So let's try this. There we go. Now I've got the whole project ID in this structure. So I need to go back to my XNAT, fix my code, and I'm going to save this. Now this secondary routing rule should catch our mistyped project ID. Let's send it from DICOM browser once again and go back to our pre-archive. And it worked. We now are receiving data into project A as opposed to the unassigned pre-archive. So that's a win. So if you remember from our introductory slides, this series description tag is already being used by XNAT for project routing. If someone were to just simply enter a project ID into this tag field, XNAT should be able to find it. So it's nice to have these custom DICOM rules, but it's only nice if it doesn't interrupt pre-existing functionality that we expect to just work. So here's a session that does just that. We've got project_A in our study description field, no extra syntax. Let's send this to our XNAT and make sure that it lands in the right place. Here's our pre-archive. We'll refresh one more time. And there we go. Our new session that we just sent is routing correctly. So we have a combination of custom behavior and default behavior all working side by side. So you can see that these rules give you a lot more capabilities when you're receiving image session data from scanners and PACS machines. And they do this without impacting the site's core functionality. There are other DICOM routing possibilities that can be explored, including identifying subject and session labeling rules. The full documentation is available on our site.